has a degree in economics from the University of Utah. He has deep experience in positions of leadership and also positions requiring technical expertise. His past jobs include Vice President of Information Systems at Overland Solutions. That's a company that partners with insurers of high-end homes. He's been a Scrum Master at Thalia. Thalia is a company that is in the financial technology or fintech space. He's currently Chief Technology Officer at Medici Ventures, which is also in financial technology or fintech with a particular focus or expertise in blockchain. We're going to try to do something a little bit different with Jeremy today as opposed to prepared remarks. This is going to be a Q&A. This isn't something that we've ever done in the speaker series before, but I think that Jeremy would be a good one to experiment with. I want to say just a couple other things before we begin the Q&A, and that is that I've known Jeremy for a long time. It's painful to say, but I first met Jeremy almost 30 years ago. And I want to just make two observations about him before we begin. The first is that he is very curious. And I think this has been an asset for him professionally and personally. He's always been interested in technology. When we were, 16, 17 years old, he knew much more about tech than everyone else. And that gap has just widened over time, the gap between his knowledge and our knowledge. But he's also interested in things you might not necessarily expect from a CTO. He's interested in philosophies and different ideas. He's passionate. He's always reading and not necessarily always in his discipline. He's just taken a very curious person and has accumulated a lot of knowledge that you can't necessarily peg to professional development necessarily. He's also curious about people. He wants to know the people around him, whether or not there's any upside in it for him. So he's curious. That's the first thing. The second thing that I know about Jeremy, with the long history that I have with him, is that he is fun. He likes to have fun. And so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, if I could. And I want to ask you what the best prank you ever pulled at work is.
The best prank. Okay. First one that comes to mind, it was a while ago, several years ago. So you used to be able to send messages to other Windows machines where you could do this command line and do a net send, and it would put a window up on another user's machine and it just pop up right on their screen. And so I remember I used to say, I'd just ping somebody. I'd be looking out at my window and watching react, but I'd put a message up that would say something like, security violation alert. Your computer will now self-destruct in 10 seconds, and just to see people react. That was pretty funny. And usually it was panic.
That's great. As far as the Q&A goes, students, if you have any questions for Jeremy, I'm going to be aggregating them and asking them directly to him. If you have any questions, please use the chat function and send them to me, and I will ask Jeremy. So the first serious question, you are the CTO of Medici Ventures. What is Medici Ventures and what is a CTO?
Sure. First, thanks for having me today, and thanks for the introduction. Really appreciate it. And I hope you forgive my Princess Leia earmuffs right now. They tend to do a lot better in being able to hear everybody. So first, Medici Ventures. Medici Ventures is the investment arm for Overstock.com. Overstock was run by an individual named Patrick Byrne for about 20 years. And Patrick Byrne became very enamored with Bitcoin very early. As a matter of fact, Overstock was the first major retailer to accept Bitcoin. They still do today with additional other cryptocurrencies, but he really saw the potential early on Bitcoin, but more importantly, the technology that underpins Bitcoin, which is called blockchain, which I'm sure everyone has now heard of. Patrick was all over this, I think 2012, 2013, pretty early in the blockchain years, and wanted to make sure that Overstock was positioned to take advantage of that. As part of that, he established Medici Ventures, which, like I said, is investment arm for Overstock. And Medici Ventures is focused on investing in companies that are specifically using blockchain. And I'm the chief technology officer there. We have a staff of software developers at Medici Ventures because we're helping some of our investments, not only with the financial investment, but we also invest with them with talent as well. So we help build the products that they're working on and get them into production and into the market.
So you mentioned blockchain. In the unlikely event that not everybody knows what blockchain is, and I include myself in that actually, could you give like a fourth grader explanation of what blockchain is and then a college student level explanation?
Blockchain is a trust machine. That's what it does. And I can explain that. What it does is it creates trust without trusting, so that I can engage and transact with somebody, even though I don't necessarily know who they are. I don't necessarily have to trust them, but I just have to trust the machine that enables that trusted interaction to occur. So blockchain enables us to create, transfer, trade, and hold unique digital assets. Now, this started with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a digital asset. And what Bitcoin did, and it's important to frame it in the context of Bitcoin because it's the one that created this wave of innovation. What it did is Bitcoin solved a very important problem, which is called the double spend problem. So what the double spend problem is that let's say, for example, I have a digital asset. A digital asset could be something like a Word document. So if I have a Word document, that Word document can be duplicated. I could take that Word document, I could copy it, I could send it in an email to 10 people. Now there are 10 copies of that same Word document floating around. That Word document is not unique. In the early days of music sharing and MP3s, companies tried to create what's called DRM, or digital rights management, around MP3s that said, okay, you can't share this with other people, only you can have possession of it because I'm going to do this check to see if you have permission to use this MP3 because you bought it through the Apple Store, for example. The problem with that is that people can figure out ways to break it. They can break DRM, they can do things so that that digital asset is no longer unique. What Bitcoin did is it solved, that's called the double spend issue. So if you look at it from a transaction or a money perspective, you can't have a currency that if I have a dollar that I can then just copy over and over and over again and give out to all my friends, right? That wouldn't work. It's no longer scarce. And so what Bitcoin did is that it solved the double spend issue where a unique digital asset can be created. And so if I have the unique digital asset and I then transfer it to another party, I no longer have it and they do. And it's impossible for me to duplicate that. Now that is really important when you think about currencies. It's also really important when you think about other kinds of digital assets that we have. So that can be contracts, that can be land titles, that can be a variety of situations that can be used. And especially with our world moving more forward in digitizing the world around us, this becomes an even more important issue. So that's kind of what blockchain represents. Again, it's a trust machine that allows those transactions to occur so you can move digital assets around without being able to copy, duplicate, tamper, do anything like that to them.
Great, thank you. What kind of projects are you working on right now?
Right now, something that's really, really important that I think is going to change the way the world operates is central bank digital currencies. So right now, our central banks, they issue money, right? They're in the central role in our monetary policy. What we're seeing happening right now is that central banks are moving towards creating a digital currency. And what that is it's like a central bank issued Bitcoin. Now it's not Bitcoin, but it's a central bank issued Bitcoin. And it's still a fiat currency that's backed by the central bank, but it's now been digitized using blockchain technology. The reason why that is important.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you describe what, in case somebody doesn't know, what a fiat currency is and a central bank? I assume 90% know those terms, but if not, would you hit those?
Yeah, sure. The central bank is the bank of the banks. It works in conjunction with the government to establish the monetary policy. So they have controls of things like they can influence, well, they set the interest rates, for example. When they lower interest rates, they can do things like expand credit, which expands our monetary supply. Because now people are taking out more loans and taking out more credit, that expands our monetary supply, our money supply. And then they can also do things like raise interest rates that then contract the money supply. They do this to control inflation. It influences all the loans and credits we have. It influences employment, unemployment. In these recent times, we've seen the central bank move interest rates all the way down to zero. They're doing that to try to spur credit, to get people taking on credit and businesses taking on credit. So they have a very important role in governing the monetary policy and the money supply of an economy. And fiat is the term we use for our dollars, our normal currency that we have, the dollars in my pocket, that's called a fiat currency. And so what central bank digital currencies represent is that they're able to take that dollar and they are working towards creating that as a unique digital asset, like I described earlier. Now, the reason why that's important is that there are challenges in developing countries, for example, where people who are unbankable, meaning they don't have any credit history, they may not have a job, they have to operate in a cash society where they have to carry around cash. To carry around cash and to use cash is actually very expensive. For example, if I have to pay a bill and I only have cash, I get paid in cash, I have to then go to the electric company to pay that bill. I have to go there and actually hand them cash. There are security issues around handling cash. It's inefficient. And so, not being able to have access to banking services is actually quite burdensome. Here in this country, access to banking services is quite common. We can go to our bank and open up an account and not even think twice about it. It's just natural. We have debit cards that we can digitally transact, but in a lot of developing countries, they don't have that kind of luxury. And so with central bank digital currencies, one of the areas where it will really help improve the lives of people, especially in developing countries, is where they can now have a bank-like experience without necessarily having a bank account. And what that means is, like, a lot of us have, say, Venmo, for example. I can send someone some money through Venmo digitally through my mobile phone. There are also companies or businesses that I can maybe pay with my mobile phone. You have to have a bank account to do that in our world. But with central bank digital currencies, what that will enable is it will digitize the money, and that users will then, because mobile phone penetration is actually quite high in developing countries, that they can use their mobile phones to actually transact currency. They can send people money, they can pay for things digitally without necessarily having a bank account. And that's going to be a tremendous benefit for people in developing countries. And that's something that we're looking at, that we're working on. As a matter of fact, we're seeing China is going to be launching their pilot this year. There'll be other banks launching pilots this year as well. This is at the forefront of a lot of conversations among central banks.
Thanks. I got a couple questions from students. One is, how does blockchain make profit?
Well, blockchain is just a technology. Blockchain itself, what it can do, it can create efficiencies in businesses. It can eliminate middlemen that have existed in traditional business models. And so for a business to use blockchain, it can increase efficiencies and reduce middlemen, which will then lead to profits for a specific business. We've also seen blockchain try to be used in areas that it shouldn't, and it doesn't provide the efficiencies. But remember, blockchain is just a tool. Like I said, it's a trust tool, so to speak. And again, it can be taken advantage of for businesses, and that's, again, just increased efficiencies.
Great. All right. Next question. I know this because I know, Jeremy, you were way ahead of the curve on crypto, and you were interested in crypto and aware of it just in the very early stages of its development. You have some strange powers to see the future. What predictions do you have? What other things can you see coming down the road?
So I mentioned central bank digital currency. That's going to be important. Blockchain is also enabling digital identity, which is going to be a very important thing going forward. We have seen hacks that have occurred around people's data. Equifax is one that was one of the more famous ones, where everyone's data was hacked, and then it's just a matter of time until your identity gets stolen. The problem is that the name of my first pet and the street that I grew up on is used to establish an identity on the internet. And it's a horrible, horrible system. But it's what we had and what, at the time, and it worked, but it doesn't work any longer. And so blockchain is enabling digital identity and digital credentials, where your identity can actually live, basically you look at it living on a blockchain that will enable you to interact digitally by using your own a digital identity. So it's like a digital driver's license. So instead of logging into a website with the username and password, you can use a digital driver's license, then access a website. Even with a driver's license, right now we have a physical card. There can be a time where your card is actually a digital credential that lives on your mobile phone that you present to someone who is requesting your ID, for example. This is going forward, especially with the COVID crisis happening. This is something there's a large interest in this today, especially now. What's happening is that in order for our society to get back to work, people want to know, okay, am I safe? If I've had COVID, a lot of people are asymptomatic. They may not even know they've had it. If I've had it, how do I know that I have the antibodies so that I am not a risk to my parents, grandparents, to people around me, that I can go back out in society? What's happening right now is that with the test, an antibody test that says whether or not you have the antibodies, or when an immunization comes out and it's more widespread, you can be issued a digital credential that's verifiable by the company that did the antibody tests that say, okay, Jeremy Smith has the antibodies. If I go into a public place, into a sporting event, or into a business, even my own workplace, I could present that credential and say, I have the antibodies, I'm not a risk, I can go out in society. This is happening right now as we speak. There's a lot of momentum in this space right now where companies are really trying to tackle this, because at the end of the day, people want to get back to work and they want to know that they're safe to get back to work.
Great. So here's a question that came in from Professor McNamee. Will there still be room for traditional banks if the central banks start issuing digital currency?
That's a great question, because it can be viewed that central bank digital currencies cut out the traditional banks. The answer, in my opinion, is yes, that the traditional banks still serve a function. I still have an account with my traditional bank. I still go into the branches. I have an ATM. I still get loans through my traditional bank. I still see them playing a role. I don't think the central bank is going to completely supplant all the other banks, even if we are interacting with the central bank digital currency.
You were in Liberia. Can you talk about that trip?
Liberia, yeah, that was an interesting and very educational experience. Just a quick history on Liberia. Liberia has struggled with civil wars over the past 20 years, and they're also the center of the Ebola outbreak. What that did to their economy was, between the civil wars and the Ebola outbreak, it reduced their GDP by about 90%. That is devastating. The poverty there is off the charts. Most homes don't have electricity. If they do, they have maybe enough for one light bulb. No traffic lights, no stop signs. Most of the roads are dirt. It's a very, very poor economy, poor country. There's an economist named Hernando de Soto, who's out of Peru, who, he makes the argument that one of the reasons why Western civilization has been able to build up its prosperity faster than others is because we have strong property rights. That property is an important fundamental part of an economy. You need to be able to know that this is what I own, these are my boundaries, and that there's a system to resolve disputes and a legal system that will uphold my property rights. So in countries like Liberia, we went there with a team that was focused on establishing and digitizing on a blockchain land titles. In Liberia and a lot of developing countries, land titles are very informal. They're on pieces of paper that are usually held by a central community organizer, and that will hold all the pieces of paper, and they'll even be hand-drawn of the boundaries, and it'll say, I own this piece right here, or this little structure right there. And it's worked, but there's a lot of problems. It's very informal. You can't get a loan, for example, with that. There are a lot of disputes of who owns what. What we did there, we talked with them and this pilot is actually just launched last month. This is with one of our investment companies called Medici Land Governance. And what they do is they go into an area, a community, and these are very, very poor communities, right? These are structures that are people's homes. They usually have a tin roof, they're small, dirt floor, but it's a person's home. I mean, it's their home that they actually own. And so what happens is that we go into a community with what are called enumerators. And enumerators go in, they go door to door, they ask a set of questions to the homeowner. They take an aerial view of the property, they outline the boundaries, and then they digitize that land title. One of the things that's really important that we've learned coming out of this is that land titling is also a women's rights issue. A lot of the land titles that were informal only had the husband as the owner on the title. As they've gone through into these communities, and this is happening in Rwanda, Zambia, and just starting in Liberia, as they go in, the enumerators go in and start digitizing these land titles, wives are being added to the land title. The reason why this is important is that in situations where the husband died and the wife was not on the land title, his brother, an uncle, somebody else would come in and claim ownership of the property. The wife wouldn't have any way to say, this is my property. The land titles saw less than 15% women on land titles, but after the enumerators go in and digitize these land titles, they've seen over 80% of women being added to the land titles. And so it's been a tremendous benefit. Now, if I have a formal land title, I can get a loan on that land title. I can take it to a bank. If I sell it, there's no dispute of actually who owns it now. And it's a huge benefit. And so the idea is to help people establish the property rights so that people can then start, gaining economically from that.
And you're using blockchain technology to create the trust there. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. The land titles are being digitized and put onto a blockchain.
Great. Next question is from Minna. Why did you want to work for Medici?
Well, like Tyler mentioned, I got really excited about Bitcoin several years ago. Bitcoin came out in 2009. I learned about it. This is kind of one of those things you hear a lot of people who got involved with Bitcoin, they like to kind of say what year they learned about it, just to kind of establish whether they're OG or not. But I got involved about 2013 is when I first started learning about it. And the blockchain space, I've always been interested in cutting edge technologies. And the blockchain space was and is so exciting. It's just such an exciting area that I kept an eye on, okay, well, where can I work in this space? Well, Medici was certainly on my radar. I'd heard about him. I kept an eye on him. And when the opportunity came up, I jumped to come over and haven't looked back.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got your job, how that process went?
Sure. Like I said, I kept an eye on Medici and I was aware of blockchain. I knew what it was. And quite honestly, I just kept hitting their career page and just refreshing every few days to see if anything popped up. When it did, I was quick to apply for a position. The other thing I think that is helpful is, and this is something that I think is really valuable, especially when you're in college, is building networks of people that you know. And that became important because the recruiter at Medici, I ended up knowing from Castle or Overland Solutions, OSI, that Tyler mentioned earlier. He's not the decision maker, but it was obviously nice to have a friendly voice and a friendly face that I could talk to and ask, so what's going on? How is this working and things like that. So I think that certainly did help. I think, again, building networks is something that's really, really important. You have to obviously have the hard skills and build your knowledge and your experience, but also building networks, because, if there are 100 different resumes, how do you stand out, for example? A lot of times, a lot of people can have comparable hard technical skills, but, sometimes it's nice to be able to have a referral or a recommendation.
So I assume that you weren't the only applicant for CTO. Can you talk about what you did to get that job? How did you stand out in order to get the CTO position?
Really, I think preparation-wise, it was just, quite frankly, just decades of experience. I didn't get this right out of school. Professor Stillman mentioned Overland Solutions, or OSI. That was a company that I co-founded. It was a startup company that then grew to about 800 people nationwide. We were gathering data for insurance companies. And that experience probably was the most important and valuable thing, I think, to get the job that I have now, or get the role I have now. The reason being is because I had experience on a startup. Like, when you're a startup and you're small and you don't have a lot of money, you have to be very creative and scrappy. You can't necessarily afford the most expensive things. You have to think outside the box. It's such a cliche term, but it's true. You have to think of ways to accomplish what you want to accomplish in very creative and inexpensive ways. As we grew, though, you have to shift your skills into a high growth, as you evolve into a medium-sized company, you can't necessarily be scrappy and just find the least expensive solution, because now when you do that, you're taking on additional risk. And as you take on additional risk, you're putting your business at jeopardy as well. And so your skills have to evolve, and your approach to problems has to evolve as well. And I think that in addition, while I was at the University of Utah, I also helped co-found the University Venture Fund, which is still around today. And that gave me exposure to the venture capital world, which I was just incredibly excited about. I love working with people who are at the forefront of pushing new areas of innovation. And that gave me that exposure. So I think having that startup experience and growing into a larger company, and then also having venture capital experience was beneficial in this role, because we work with startup companies, we work with founders, and I get their mindset. I can jump into their heads and think, okay, I get it. I can get why they're maybe taking this approach, because they're in that startup, that high energy passion that they have. I understand it. I get it. And I think those experiences are what help most.
Great, thank you. Another question from the class. What are some current problems with blockchain that are yet to be solved?
Oh, man. Yeah, biggest problem right now is probably scalability. The way that blockchain works, it's kind of slow. And in order for it to be fully utilized in areas that people are excited about, we need the transaction throughput to be higher. So to give an example, Bitcoin can do, I want to say 7 transactions per second. Ethereum, which is another cryptocurrency blockchain, is somewhere around that 20 transactions per second. That's untenable. To give that, to put that into perspective, MasterCard, Visa, they can handle somewhere around 40, 50,000 transactions per second. So scalability, being able to have a lot of throughput through a blockchain is probably the biggest challenge. There's a lot of work and development in this space. A lot of people are working on it. Everyone knows that it's a problem, and we'll come to solutions. I mean, look at the early days of the internet. A lot of you probably don't remember, but you used to have to dial up with a phone. That was extremely slow, and you couldn't even get graphics in the early days. It was all just plain text, and it was really super slow. Today, we stream 4K movies without even batting an eyelid. So it takes time to build out the technology, and that's where we're at today. We're still in the dial-up phase of blockchain, but I have full confidence in human inventiveness and the ability to innovate, and it won't be an issue. It just takes time and patience. Then the other second problem is probably, it's hard to understand, to be honest with you, and it's hard to understand areas where it's applicable and areas where it's not. You really have to have a deep understanding of the domain that you're applying it to really understand, is this helping and benefiting, or is it just kind of a buzzword that I say I throw blockchain and then I get people to give me money kind of thing, which we saw happening a few years ago? Or is this really solving a real issue? And that's what's happening today. There's a lot of experimentation. People are trying. Is blockchain applicable? Is it really gaining in the efficiencies that we hope? Is it eliminating the middlemen that we were hoping that it would, or is it not? And so there's a lot of trial and error happening. A lot of businesses will fail and some will succeed as we figure this out.
I'm sure you have both technically challenging dimensions to your job and also more organizationally challenging problems. Can you talk about the most technically challenging aspect of your job and then maybe the most organizationally challenging part?
Yeah. I think the most technical challenging part is staying on top of all the emerging technologies and companies. Like I mentioned, Bitcoin was the first blockchain. Ethereum came along. That was a major innovation. There are now, I don't even know how many, thousands of blockchains that are all trying different ways to solve different problems. It is really hard to stay on top of what's going on. There's so much activity around that. And the other part is that, we vet a lot of companies that are looking for an investment. And, a challenging part is you have to be able to quickly have an understanding of a domain that you may know very little about, and get up to speed around a domain very quickly, and then try to figure out, okay, with what I know about this domain or this area of business, is blockchain actually beneficial? Is it really solving a true problem that exists? That's hard. That's hard to figure out because you're talking to people who may have 10 years experience in a specific domain, and you have a half an hour or an hour call to get up to speed of that domain and to try to understand whether or not blockchain technology will actually create efficiencies.
Great. And then on the organizational side, you have to manage people, not just technology. So what do you find challenging there?
I think the biggest challenge with any organization is building alignment across the organization. When everyone is aligned and coordinated towards a common vision, then I think we see great results. And I think it's a mistake for a company to put out a vision or a mission statement and put it on a wall and then never talk about it. They just think, okay, we did that, and they check it off a checklist and say, okay, we created a mission statement. Now we know what our mission is. I think it's something that has to be constantly talked about and debated, and that's important because it is constant work to keep people aligned and coordinated towards that mission or that vision you're working on. And one of the kind of the approach that I take and my team takes is that the first thing we do is, and we really try to build trust. We try to build trust with each other, with people that are in our organization, the people we need to report to. We're always looking on how can we build trust. I think Peter Drucker, he was a management consultant. He's passed on, but he said, trust eats strategy for breakfast. And I believe that 100%. Being able to operate in a high trust environment it's a lubricant. It makes everything easier. You have alignment much faster and much easier if you can operate within trust. And if trust gets broken or something happens, then you have to be quick to try to rebuild it. Nobody's perfect. And so that's probably the first thing. And then the next thing I'd say is, on top of trust, as you start with a foundation of trust, you're able to build up psychological safety. And this has been well documented that organizations that have strong psychological safety, it encourages experimentation, it encourages calculated risks, it helps people to, it empowers people to make decisions so they're not operating in a place of fear. If people are operating in a place of fear, they're going to seize up, they're going to be afraid to make a decision, they're going to be afraid to take a risk. Well, in business, you have to be able to take calculated risks. You have to be able to do that. And if you don't foster a culture that allows that, then you're going to have all sorts of problems and challenges. The last thing I was going to say is, I think the next thing is, after that, is leading by intention or intent-based leadership. This is something that our president, Medici Ventures, his name is Jonathan Johnson, he talks quite a bit about as well. And the idea is that, say you're a commander and in the military, and you want to take the hill, and it's just a allegorical hill. The intention is, okay, everybody, we need to take the hill. Now, a bad commander would say, okay, you're going to step over here, then you're going to go there, then you're going to go there, and try to micromanage the process of taking the hill. The commander will say, we need to take the hill, and then trust the team to go about taking the hill. And if the team succeeds, then you give credit. They did a great job. If the team fails, then you take blame. Because leadership, in my opinion, is being able to, again, give credit and take blame. And, to take blame, you have to sit there and step back. Okay, did I provide the proper vision? Did I communicate it effectively? Did I help coordinate the activities of the team well? Did I give them the support they needed, the tools they needed, the knowledge they needed? How can I improve to help make sure that they succeed? And to me, that's my opinion. That's what leadership is about expressing intent and making and empowering your team and trusting them to get the job done.
Wow, great answer again. So you studied economics. Do you use what you learned in economics, or how often, or do you at all?
All the time. So economics talks a lot about supply and demand. It's trying to understand incentives. It tries to understand game theory. And I think, just to kind of circle back to Bitcoin and blockchain, I think what got me the most excited about it wasn't just a technology, and it's not just a technology. It takes a technology with economics and game theory and mashes them all together. And that is what creates the trust. So economics to me has been a very important field that I'm very glad that I pursued. I was always into technology, I always have been, but I didn't necessarily want to go into computer science. I was, I loved economics so much that the thing that I always used to ask myself and still do is what provides value? Why is that priced that much? Where does value actually come from? How is value actually derived? And I think that's still a relevant question. I think that's an important question, especially when you're looking at a company you're looking to invest in. You really need to understand, okay, are they actually providing value?
It's a good segue to a question from Benjamin, who asks, how do you decide what companies to invest in? Also, do you invest in individual companies or Bitcoin type index funds?
Okay, so we don't invest in index funds or specific cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. We're looking more at businesses. And how do we decide if it's a business that we're willing to look at? I think the most important criteria in looking at an investment is the team. It's really understanding, is this a team that can execute on a vision? Because you can have a fantastic business idea. And to be quite frank, there are a gazillion great business ideas. Okay, I think if we all had a nickel for every time we had a great business idea in the shower, right, we'd all be rich, right? There's plenty of great ideas. It's about execution. And so the most important thing is that whether there is a team that has the ability to execute. And you can have a great idea with a moderate team or not a very good team, and it will fail. You can have a moderate idea, but a great team, and I'd give the odds that they would have a better chance of succeeding. And trying to understand whether a team is an effective team is hard. That's a challenge. You look at their past experience, you look at whether they've been able to execute before, you look at they've ran a startup before, you look at their domain knowledge and experience that they have, you look at how well they work together, how they assembled the right people. Just recently, I was on a call with a company. They actually had a really good idea. However, the team was only technologists. They didn't have a CEO type person who could really establish a vision. They didn't have a person who was kind of, we name the huckster, which is kind of the salesperson who can go out there and wheel and deal and be a rainmaker out there in the market to get interest in the solution. Again, you can have a great solution, but if you can't sell it or talk about it or communicate it, it's not going to go anywhere. You have to have somebody who can do that. And so we always look at, is this the right mix of the team? Do they have the right elements, the right people that can work well together to actually execute?
Thanks. Just got 3 minutes left, and maybe I'll throw a couple of questions out and you can pick and choose. Okay. What's the hardest part of your job? What's the most rewarding part? What books are you reading? And have you ever lost your temper at work? You're famously a nice guy. Have you ever lost your mind on somebody?
Yeah, I've gotten frustrated. That's happened, but we're all human, I think. I try to keep that at a minimum. Books I'm reading. Now I'm reading one called Behave. It's a long one, but it's very interesting. It's just about the composition of our brains that cause us to behave in the ways we behave. It's very insightful. One before that, one of my favorite books, Sapiens. I think that book is absolutely fantastic. It's kind of along the same lines. Hardest and most rewarding. Hardest is the alignment. That's something that's really, really hard, is getting alignment, constant communication. And that's challenging, especially when you're like, oh, I felt like I communicated clearly, but then you see, actions going a direction that you weren't expecting. Like, okay, again, I'm very slow to point fingers and say, well, it's their fault. No, it's right here. Like, okay, what do I need to be doing to be more effective in communicating? What do I need to be doing to make sure that the vision is clear, so that there is alignment? Am I speaking? Do I need to speak more frequently? How should I be going about doing that? That's probably most challenging. And then most
rewarding.
Most rewarding. I get excited when I see the teams that are building products succeed, when they actually get them to market, when they actually come together and deliver on a vision that was just this idea that's sitting in somebody's head, and now it's a real tangible thing that's been built. That process and seeing the teams succeed like that is awesome. And they get excited and I get excited with them.
Jeremy, that's it for our time today. Couldn't be more pleased with your willingness to share your time with us and expertise. Please join us again sometime when it's a little safer. We hope you'll visit us at SUU.